It's a lot of fun just catching up. But we are going to try. We are in 1 Kings, I think. 1 Kings 7, or let's see, you could go to 4. Part of it, you can get 2 Chronicles. So, you can go either place and you can get the second half of this one goes with this. The first half is not repeated over there, which is kind of interesting.
Aren't we going to go with the second one?
Well, eventually, I suppose we might have to if we all, if the Lord doesn't return first, which is a distinct possibility. The rate we're going. Let's see, how long have we been in the first 6 chapters? It's been a long old pull. So, been quite a while. Anyway, we'll see where we can go this morning. Does somebody want to look straight up? Tabitha, would you look straight up there and tell me, did I get that thing sort of halfway in this direction? Is it looking okay? Okay. I think I may have actually accidentally turned it on. So, to whoever, we don't have our technical experts, so if you're watching online and it's weird, I'm sorry, it was my fault. We'll hope it works. We have worked our way, and I know we left a lot of details undetailed in the temple, but it just seems like you could go on and on forever trying to wrestle with all of them, and so I've kind of left you to go hopefully ask your own 5-year-old whys about why were there these things and those things and some others, and maybe investigate a little bit, to the best of your ability, what some of those might mean. And it's challenging because all through this passage, the commentators that I've been using the most spend lots of time discussing the Hebrew and what it tells us and what it's saying technically, but don't ever ask the question, why is it like that? This morning is another really good one, only the guy actually gives an excuse after he goes through multiple pages on this first part of Solomon's house, which is where we are this morning, in the building of Solomon's house. And it took him 13 years. So Kathy, be patient. I will get there. I'm following this.
It's scriptural.
Yeah, it's scriptural. When you do remodeling projects, drag it out. Just wanted you to know that.
You wouldn't go against the Lord, would you?
This is man against woman.
Tough already. Yeah. Moving right along.
I must have missed something.
You missed something. There, go
back to sleep.
So, he did finish it though, I want you to know, and he built the house, verse 2 there, he built the house in the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits, and its width was 50, and the height was 30, on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on the pillars, and it was paneled with cedar above the side chambers, which were on the 45 pillars, 15 in each row. You got that all so far? Good. Oh. And there, yeah, you didn't have to clean. Yeah. And there were artistic window frames in 3 rows, and window was opposite window in 3 ranks. And all the doors and doorposts had squared artistic frames, and the window was opposite window in 3 ranks. Aren't you glad of that? And he made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits, and its width 30. And a porch was in front of them, and pillars, and a threshold in front of them. And he made the hall of the throne where he was to judge, the hall of judgment, and it was paneled with cedar from floor to floor. And his house where he was to live, the other court inward from the hall, was of the same workmanship. He also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had married. And all these were costly stones, of stone cut according to measure, sawed with saws inside and outside, even from the foundation to the coping, and so on the outside to the great court. And the foundation was of costly stones, even large stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. And above were costly stones, stone cut according to measure, and cedar. And so the great court all around had 3 rows of cut stone, and a row of cedar beams, even as the inner court of the house of the Lord and the porch of the house. Wow. And I went through that, and I read pages and pages of these guy going through all of what it means, and that means this, and that this guy's translation of how it looked is that, and it got all the way down to the bottom end, and the commentator said, well, after doing all this, I ran into this problem, and one of them is the way the description looks, the columns would be so close together, if you do the math on how big the column was and how wide it is, it would be just about enough that you could squeeze through the pillars in the way that they were trying to translate it. It would be, you know, you would be like in a forest, and how can you have a great hall and all this? So he says, after all of this, I decided to give up on the idea of trying to draw out a diagram because we just don't understand enough about what it's describing to be able to accurately figure it out. Now, when you go hunting around, you will find people have tried to take wild ideas, but basically they're saying, you know, we really don't know what they're trying to describe. But it does appear that he's built some kind of a, it almost looks like he's got a center courtyard thing and then stuff around it, you know, that way, and then stuff patched on either end or something. It appears there's something like that going on, and that maybe these columns, you know, are like this. Because when you talk about all the rows of columns, but if you just translate it literally as rows of columns, you just got them right, you know, next to each other, and it is a forest. And they said, that's nuts, it can't be like that. You wouldn't do that. So we're not sure exactly what his house looked like. All that we can really gather from this is it's a pretty significant complex that he's built, and it includes public areas where he did basically held court, if you will. And there are the 2 private homes and then other meeting places. One looks like it refers to almost like it was an armory. It was a place where they kept their some at least of the weaponry. It wasn't just a warehouse, but something where they were even displayed. I don't know just how that might have worked out. But some have actually translated, and you may find notes where he talks about the house of the forest of Lebanon, that, oh, he had a summer house in Lebanon. The best commentators say, no, the point was, it took a forest from Lebanon to build the house. And that's why they called it that.
That's what I thought was interesting. It says you build it of the forest.
Yeah.
Like they're cut them all down.
Yeah, and when you start looking at all the pillars and columns and the beams and everything else, it took a ton of lumber hauled in from Lebanon. And I saw a thing the other day, it was one of these travel shows, and the guy was traveling, it's been some years ago, I don't know, it was in the late 90s, I think he was saying. So it's not all that terrible long ago, was traveling through Iran and seeing all the places there. And one of the places he wanted to go was where the kingdom had been in the time of a guy named Darius. Is that right?
Yeah.
King Darius. Does that name ring a bell with anybody?
Yeah, the meeting.
That was the head of Persia, right? Medo-Persia. Anybody else?
Was he the one that let the Hebrews go back to their land? Wasn't he the one that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Nehemiah's time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I thought that was Daniel.
Was it, now let's see, was it Daniel?
Yes, Daniel.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right, it is, because Daniel's, it's the fire in the furnace.
Cyrus that let the
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, Cyrus is the next guy.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. We did it right, yeah. So we got the fiery furnace in the furnace.
Isn't Persia Iran?
It's Iran, yeah. And he went to the place where his capital would have been. And the ruins are still there, even today. You can go and see these ruins, and it's amazing, these great big huge halls, and there are all these, I don't know how to describe it, they're these like stumps of stone set out there. And each one of those is a foundation for a pillar. And it made this huge covered area with a roof, had a roof over the top of it at one time. Guess what they built it out of? Cedar from Lebanon. I thought it was such a huge thing that they brought cedars from Lebanon all the way to Jerusalem. Can you imagine taking cedars from Lebanon up over the Green Crescent and down the Euphrates? I don't know, they floated them down the river and then hauled them. But when you saw this place, we're talking big timbers. I mean, they were spanning some huge distances between these
What
things.
does Lebanon look like now? Does it have any trees?
Lebanon looks a lot like the Horse Heaven Hills out here, only more rugged.
No trees.
There are some trees still remaining, and there are some national forests and some efforts to reestablish the trees, but it's different.
Well, I'm just curious, is it like our cedar that we have on our coast?
A little different, but they were very tall, big trees and provided some excellent
those
lumber.
were-
Yeah,
I had uncles that were loggers, and I've seen some of those stumps.
the size of this room sort of thing, yeah. I'm not sure if they were that huge or not, but they were pretty good size. They were big, tall trees.
In the book of Esther, you know, there was the description of that king and
Right.
when he held his great, what the courtyard and everything looked like, and
It was
So that kind
big,
of-
yeah. It was big, wide open, huge area. So it would have taken tons and tons of lumber, and you can see why they stripped the country, I guess, because of the, whether it didn't get replanted, or they harvested faster and it would regrow, or climate change caught up with them, or something happened.
They probably didn't replant back there.
And
They probably
wars.
they just counted on the reseeding of the
To
trees
the natural
themselves, yeah.
growth, yeah, might have.
and wars wiped
And
out
wars.
because they used them to
Yeah.
build sieges. and
Sure,
the siege
all
was-
kinds of things, yeah, siege ramps and equipment, and it was used for everything. So even though it was a huge area, would have been forested, it was, a lot of it went out all over the world. It was a huge trading thing, and the artisans that probably did it as well. The most interesting thing I ran into when I was studying the cedars of Lebanon, they're trying to reestablish them. Guess what stood in the way of reestablishing in one of the prime areas where they used to grow? Hamas stood in the way.
Did they have any mortar?
Most of them apparently were not, but occasionally there was some kind of lime mortar was used in some things, but a lot of the big stones were just fit stone on stone. It's amazing.
As you said on one of the wall, that thin, you see. The
Oh.
bigger ones on top of the road and the bottom, you had to have something.
Yeah, well, what they did is the walls, because it's kind of like a dam, the walls were thicker at the bottom than at the top, so they would have been like that.
Well, I read you sticker out.
Well, then
Around the wall, I see.
yeah, they came out like that, so the top story was wider than the, that's, I had the same thought, man, these things are hanging out there
Yeah.
sideways.
What kind of saw did they have to trim those?
Come on, Ron, you're supposed to know all these things.
How they saw
Chainsaw.
those rocks, they actually used bronze saws to saw that rock. Can you believe that? Of course, it wasn't basalt, it's a different kind of stone, but still, yeah.
They have to
Bronze
be huge,
chisels.
soft, I mean, what, to
Yeah.
get through that.
Can you imagine being the guy on the bottom end in the pits?
They weren't diamond tipped?
I don't think they had diamond tips. They might have had a few diamonds around, but
That's probably part of the reason it took 13 years.
you wonder, yeah, to cut those stones. And,
Manpower.
right. And perhaps the shorter time for the temple was because David had repaired a bunch of that faster, I don't know.
Well, probably, I mean, it seems to me that if they're cutting all that stone and stuff, a lot of people probably were killed during that because of just rocks falling on them.
Hazardous business.
Yeah.
Not to mention
Trees.
silicosis of the ocean working in it, and
Yeah.
dust in your lungs, and it was a tough business of doing that.
Think of the pyramids and all of the things that, and the Mayans. and
Yeah, all those
Those
civilizations.
people weren't smart enough to figure all that out.
Yeah, we're not smart enough to figure out how they did it. And they were, and you go, well, I don't know if we're evolving that much or not. So it's interesting to look at all that, and how they did it. And of course, there's one other thing about the temple and the number of years that it took to build it. And I think the Lord had that planned, whether it's because David had done that or not. But 7, of course, is the number we talked about last time of completion and of perfection, but especially of completion, that everything was complete. Just like creation was completed, the work was completed in 7 days. So
New construction is always faster than remodel.
maybe that's what it is, yeah. The other issue that people have had with this whole thing, and this does not discuss it other than it's near the temple, was where was this thing? And when they go and actually physically look at Mount Moriah, there's not room enough on Mount Moriah. Even the later expansions when they did more filling and excavating, and so there's a pretty strong argument that this was not on Mount Moriah, but that it was across the Tyropoeon Valley, which is the little, I don't remember if we got Jerusalem sits in this big draw, the Kidron here. Okay. The Kidron comes down, and then we have this other one going up here, and let's see, Jerusalem kind of sat like that on this ridge, and then there's a little valley comes down here. We have Moriah here, where the temple's being built, and we have over here, let's see, is that right? Yeah. Over here on the sides of the north, as they say, is another little hill. Anybody remember what that one's called? Zion is over there, Mount Zion is on the other side, and there's this little draw, we would say, from Bickleton, this little gully down through the middle that's now all filled in, by the way. And they believe there's evidence to show in the stones that remain in the western wall and other things that there was a bridge of sorts between these two across the valley, and that his palace would have been over on this side, and he had a connection over to the other side to the Temple Mount, which there's interesting discussion about how that might work and how that would be, but it really appears that maybe that's the case, that the king lived down Mount Zion. And you go, that seems to have some parallels and other things we think of as Zion, an illustration of heaven, and the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is found in Mount Zion, the city of the great king, so, as the song goes.
We know that God had a purpose in everything, in all of this. You just don't know what they all are.
Yeah, you don't always understand what all the pieces are and what the things that he was teaching are, but it's interesting to see that there's some evidence out there that supports it.
I think it's interesting that it's taken from creation to now for man to try and figure out God. I mean, we don't really know how many exactly years it's been.
Yeah. Haven't figured him out yet, obviously. Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out how they got them big logs to Jerusalem. Was there any way to float them up as close as possible?
No, because this is high elevation. It's like floating logs up to Bickleton from the Yakima Valley. It'd be quite literally that kind of elevation gain. You're going to be several thousand feet elevation gain. They had to go on a road, and they had to come from, if you remember how the land lays with the coast over here, and got the little, so you've got Jerusalem sitting over here on a ridge, you got a river valley here, a plain kind of here, so this is all the mountainous area, and you got logs coming down to the coastline somewhere, and then they've got to take them up and probably over and up this way.
What if they cut them
That's
ahead
what I
of
was wondering,
time?
if they cut them
Cut them
before they.
into manageable.
Could have, but if they were big timbers and roof timbers and columns, some of those things would still have been sizable. So probably had some kind of cart, I mean, you wouldn't just pack them on your shoulders, so probably had some kind of mechanism to pull them with something. But like I say, even more than that, when you get to thinking about taking them to Persia, I mean, that's going way up here, over the top, and we're going way over here somewhere. Clear over in Iran. Look at a map and you'll go, wow, that's a long ways from Lebanon to the middle of Iran. And no airlift. A lot of oxen, a lot of something, slaves, yeah. And this must have been a regular wagon train to get it over there. Because we didn't have any shortcuts across, right? You know, they worried about the Gulf of Hormuz and places like, well, I don't know what else you would do to get them over to Persia. You have to go around back up the river. That'd be almost as difficult to work them that way, so. Yeah, just a lot of rough territory in between, rough seas if you try to go around. I just can't imagine how they got them there. Pretty mind-boggling what these folks did, and you think of the wealth that it took to do that is incredible. I mean, if you translate that into our times, they were incredibly wealthy. Probably put us in the shade for the amount of money that they had to do stuff with.
Would it have said anywhere in the Bible about, okay, it was 7 years it took to build it,
From the time Solomon started to the completion.
but to get the supplies there, does that count within that 7 years, I wonder?
No, because David actually
That's
started the
right.
process while he was still
So they
king,
could've
so
been
he was
hauling that
collecting
stuff.
and probably working on the stones. And so they started the jigsaw puzzle well before Solomon put all the pieces together. They were assembling the pieces and the gold. And so pretty impressive. So he's got this palace built somewhere here that we can argue about, I guess, where it is. Stone walls, cedar inside, very nice, very elaborate, not to the extent that you see in the temple. Yes. Actually, some may have been stone, but you notice that some were cedar. It said from floor to floor that these connected in. They were actually had cedar flooring. So they had hardwood. Well, I don't know if cedar's hardwood. They had wood floors, probably polished.
So, is it gonna be warm, is it gonna be
I'm sure it's not going to be like what we're used to because they don't have central heating and things like that. But I suspect it was at least comfortable most of the time. Of course, the temperatures there can be cold in the winter, warm in the summer, a lot of swings. But I would guess they, to the best of their technology, they probably had, the king was probably relatively comfortable.
I find it interesting he made an extra house for his wife from Egypt, but how many other wives did he have? And they didn't each get houses like this.
They would have been probably attached to her house or someplace around there would have been the house for all the concubines.
The women's house.
The women's
Would you
house.
explain to her what all the wives were for?
Somebody
Moving
had
right
to
along.
clean that place, you know.
Yeah.
You think of, you know, you talk about being wealthy, think of what it took to keep 1,000 wives.
Yeah.
Their attendants, but whatever it takes to keep, you know, it just
Yeah.
was like it boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Feed 'em.
Yes, just to feed
Feed them now. Remember we went through all those truckloads of grain and stuff that it took to
The
come?
floor was even overlaid with gold.
Yeah.
It wasn't wood they were walking on.
In the temple, yeah, the entire inside of the temple was covered with gold. Wall to wall, ceiling, floor, everything. Just, in fact, in Chronicles, it actually tells you the weight and the talents of the nails that held the heavier, because we're not even talking gold leaf like today. You know, I don't know if you've seen it. It looks like this super thin foil you barely breathe on. It blows away, and they brush it on with a little fine brush, which works great for all the little carvings and things. But on the bigger areas, they believe it was a hammered gold plate. It would have been like sheet metal. And so it was held on with gold nails. And Chronicles tells you the weight of the nails in talents of gold nails that held the pieces of golden beaten work onto the walls. So it was.
Gold is pretty soft. I wonder if they would have made it 18 karat.
Yeah. It says pure gold.
Pure gold.
Pure gold.
They must
So when they-
have drilled a little bit or something.
Something, they probably had a little awl that they poke a hole and then drive the nail through.
And they weren't allowed to use any metal other than gold, were they, for tools, I can think?
They probably used bronze tools, I would guess, to install it. Now, they didn't have any chiseling, sounding, and hammers on the stone in the temple site, but obviously you gotta drive a nail in the gold, there'd be a little tap, tap, tap or so.
24 karat hammer.
So,
So when they were conquered, then no wonder the temple was destroyed because of the weather and
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
Carried off all that
Yeah.
to Babylon.
they packed it all off and built that fancy palace thing I was looking at the ruins of, probably. Yeah. And burned the rest in cedar. So you can, I always used to wonder, how can they burn a stone temple? Well, it wasn't stone, it was stone foundations and stone on the walls, but the whole inside. And if you think about it, when you look at the ruins in Greece and look at ruins in other places, what is left? Stone walls open on top, and then you get to looking and there's holes in the stone walls and notches and places where all those timbers fit. They use a lot of wood in them.
Cedar really burns, it's the best kindling.
Yeah, it makes the best, hottest fire.
But it's also, you know, I was sitting here thinking about all the different things about cedar, and number one, it's real aromatic. I mean, just, it's incredible. So the temple, I mean, they had the incense burning in the temple, so it wouldn't have fought it because it was covered in gold, but in his palace,
You want
oh
it.
my gosh. And then it
Smell like
repels
cedar.
moths.
Yeah.
It, I mean,
Yeah.
they used a lot of wool.
Yeah, so you wonder if that was part of the, if that was actually in the design. So fascinating stuff when you get in there, and the only thing that just drives me wild is why? Why did God put all that detail that we can't even figure out? Why did he go to that trouble to put that in there? You know, maybe he's just trying to help us get a little glimpse of the way Solomon lived and the wealth that he had and influence, and just give you the idea that when people came to see this king, it was something impressive. He had a nice house. He didn't invite them into a little hovel, that they really had it world class.
Also, God knew that Solomon would do anything for him. And if he would put his wealth into this,
Mm-hmm.
he treasured God. And when God
Put his
wants
money
us-
where his heart was.
wants us to remember that there were those who treasured him as he should be treasured.
Yeah, there were a lot of folks at this time, they were really, and it's neat as you go through and see the completion of this, and they start describing the day of dedication and that sort of thing, and you see the heart of the people at that time, at least the majority of them.
Well, that was part of God's promise to Solomon too, because he asked for wisdom. God said, I'll also give you
The
wealth.
wealth. So here's evidence of the promise fulfilled that's there. So that may very well be what some of this is about, to give us a little taste that God said, I deliver on the promises that I made. So we get through that, and we're getting close on time, but the next thing that seems kind of strange is he goes into another one of those different gear shifts. So we just went through the temple, and now we shifted over to the house, and then he shifts back to the temple and the fixtures that go in and around it, and spends a lot of time, and then he goes way out of his way to describe the guy that's in charge. So the general contractor for all this detail work that goes around the temple is described to us in verse 14. It says, King Solomon sent, and he brought Hiram, or in Chronicles he's called Huram, from Tyre. And he was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in bronze. And he was filled with wisdom and understanding and skill for doing any work in bronze. So he came to King Solomon and performed all his work. Here's this guy, and he seems to be the son, I'm trying to see if I can remember how they just, when they go through all the experts and analyze this, he would have been the son of a man of the tribe of Naphtali in the land of Dan, and he may well have been the second marriage for his mother, that he was from Tyre, that his father may have, because it says a man from Tyre would have been Phoenicia. So it looks like that he was somehow connected to the Phoenicians and yet had a mother with, and an anchor within the tribe of Judah, or tribes of Israel as well. So I guess they can argue how that all works out, but it appears that the widow is of the tribe of Naphtali, his father being a man of Tyre. So we've got, but she being a widow means that her husband, who was probably from the tribe of Naphtali or other, has passed away, and she's remarried. Does that make sense? And the question is, why is that important? I'm not sure.
But that's where he got his skill, was from
Got his
his
skill
father
from Tyre.
Tyre.
They are known apparently, and it appears to follow in other evidence that they were known for their skill in working with cedar, obviously, and wood, and harvesting and falling timber. And here's a guy that understands how to use bronze and how to work it, how to make stuff. And this guy has got to be more than just a technician. It appears that he's kind of an artist as well. Obviously, he had a lot of folks working for him. He didn't do this physically all himself. But they set up some works. We find out at the end, it's down in the plain of the Jordan. And they've got a big bronze works down there, and with all the furnaces and a place to cast them. So all these things are manufactured and brought out.
In the Jewish culture, isn't it the mother that is the, that's like the bloodline or the emphasis that you're like Timothy.
It's interesting how they connect, and yet for the Lord, see, it's the father's side that matters. It's the tribe of Judah, and of course, that was a problem for Joseph. Could not have been the father of the Savior, because Joseph's line takes you right to a man with a curse placed upon him, and says none of yours will ever be there. But through Mary, you do have a clear line back to David that's bypasses that whole thing. So it's interesting how sometimes the mothers emphasized, and yet some of the important lines came to the father too.
I think even today.
So we've got this guy with his great skill, and he's going to build a bunch of stuff, and we'll take a look at it a little more next time. Again, lots of all detail that they don't understand the Hebrew, but just for starters, he's got 2 pillars that he's got to build, and they're both sizable, and they got a lot of decoration in them. He's got the C, as they call it, which is the replacement for the laver that he's going to build, and the stand that goes with it. Then he has smaller, I don't know, you can call them basins if you want, but they're large basins. There's going to be 10 of those, and the stands that go with them, and they are wheeled. He's got the bronze altar, and then he goes in and he does all the gold work inside. So that includes, let's see, 10 of the lamps, 10 tables, and 1 altar. What else?
Oh, well, inside the Holy of Holies was the cherubim.
Cherubim. Got 2 of those. And I'm trying to think if there's, that's most of it, I think. I may have missed some of it. There were probably some pans and censers and other things that he had to make, some of which David had already apparently prepared and had ready to go. When you get down to the end, it talks about bringing all the supplies into the storerooms, and a lot of it sounds like those kinds of equipment. But this guy's got a huge task to do, and you wonder how long did it start with day 1 while they're still building the temple? Did they start in this? Because this must have been a major undertaking. If you think about it, this is all cast bronze. So we got cast bronze, So that tells you there's several things that you got to do if you studied all about sculptures and
He also had the ornamentation, talks about chains and
Yeah.
right some
a
other.
huge
I don't know.
amount of ornaments.
Carvings.
So, yeah, a bunch of other stuff that goes along with, connected to some of these items and some of those things that all had to be created. And if they're cast, and the bronze part is, see, bronze, you don't go dig up bronze, you dig up copper and you dig up zinc and you alloy them. So you have to do the metallurgy, you got to do the foundry stuff to actually create the bronze. So you got to melt it all down, and then these things are all cast, so you have to have a mold to put them in. So you got to design the mold, bring in the materials to do the mold, whether it's the sand or whatever. You build them twice. You build the unit, pack it in this sand mixture, and then either it's made out of wax and you melt it out as you pour the stuff in, or you have to remove the mold and the thing you molded around, put the sand thing back together, and then pour it full of mold. Big job, huge job.
How far away are they doing all this?
They're doing this somewhere down on the Jordan, probably because they needed water, needed fuel,
So now we got to transport it.
and then you got to take all the parts and pack them back up the hill.
You know, I'd have just said, I'm sorry, I just can't deal with it. This is just too much.
Yeah.
The Lord gave you the wisdom.
And he definitely had wisdom.
Strength and-
Though it's interesting, this guy does very much the same thing as, was it Bezalel or Bez something, back when they built the tabernacle. But with him it says he was filled with the Lord's Spirit. And it never says this guy is greatly skilled and gifted, but it never mentions the Spirit on him. And I wonder why. There may be a reason for that. Maybe it's because this guy had a model to follow that was from the previous one, and so he didn't have to be inspired and designed. But, well, we're about out of time. We are out of time. Let's close for now, and we'll take a look at it next time and see what God's trying to show us maybe in some of these details. Father, thank you for our time this morning. Kind of rattling around here just trying to figure out what does this really mean and what is this telling us. Why have you recorded this, Father? But help us to see in it maybe the hint of your promises fulfilled to Solomon, perhaps a glimpse of the majesty of his reign and the wealth that he had, the amazing skill, whether spirit-filled or just spirit-given by grace to these men to do this work, for the purpose of teaching your people about yourself. As we study these things, we pray that we would catch a glimpse of truth about you, of the glory of your kingdom and your power, your person, that these things would all hint towards that, and they would teach us about our Savior, the sacrifice he made and the payment for our sin, that are all demonstrated in this temple, and in each of those fixtures are truths about the price that was paid for us. Pray, Father, that you would help us to understand those things and be able to appreciate and give you praise and thanks for that gift of grace, that we might understand how we fit into your city, your new Jerusalem that you're creating, that we will someday all be part of. And we look forward to that day where we all can give praise face to face before our God. We thank you, Father, for this time together this morning. In Jesus' name.